has estimated that more than 96,000 Kentucky children live in kinship care, meaning they're under the supervision of other relatives or close family friends.
And it's one of the highest rates in the nation. Advocates say they need more support and funding to make a positive change. When a child can't safely live with their parents, sometimes relatives and close family friends step up to provide care.
It's essential for kids to stay connected in some capacity to family and folks that they know in order to reduce the amount of trauma that gets experienced due to that removal.
Right now, there are about 58,000 children in Kentucky living with their grandparents.
One is because obviously we've been hit pretty hard by the opioid epidemic. That is an unfortunate reality for a lot of our families across the whole state.
Kentucky youth advocates lobby on behalf of children to work with lawmakers and other elected officials in search of change, whether that's helping to tweak language in legislation or encouraging the use of budgetary funding. They say every child deserves someone in their corner.
Allowing for folks to understand that they do have a voice, their voice is important, and then seeing that change happen as they make recommendations.
And as is true with most things, there isn't always enough money to go around, but there is one resource that advocates say should be considered, and one particular group who is owed a seat at the table.
Directly related to opioid settlement funds, our communities talking about how kids are impacted and our relative caregivers or kinship families, how they can be supported with those funds.
They tell me the goal is to be proactive instead of reactive, helping children undergo mental health counseling to begin healing wounds and then focusing on breaking the cycle. UK's College of Social Work is home to the Kentucky Kinship Resource Center, so they provide peer support and other support groups as well as a guide to available programs all across the state.